Hi, everybody. Before we get into introductions of our super knowledgeable panel, we only have 20 minutes today to cover a lot of ground. And we tried to talk about this yesterday quickly, and we ended up spending over an hour going through these topics. So we'll try and get through it. This is personally a very interesting topic to me. I've spent a lot of life kind of focusing on future cities and smart cities. And obviously today we're talking about building the metropolis of the future. We're going to try and touch on as many of these topics as possible, but obviously we've still only got that 20 minutes to get through, but we'll do our best. And I heard, as we were coming in there from Nico, flying taxis is going to be hopefully we can get onto that topic at some point. But we'll be talking about transportation in and out of cities, and the way that needs to evolve using technology. I think we'll get onto efficient utilization of physical buildings in urban centres and what instant reconfiguration might look like. How are we going to encourage people back to our cities for work, leisure and living once we globally get control of this pandemic and COVID-19? Maybe that should be an interesting topic today. And hopefully how we can inspire the next generation of intelligent and diverse groups of people to get excited about the future of our cities, to continue this work. As Nico said, I'm Pete Hallet, CTO of District Technologies. At District, we're building a digital layer for real estate that allows users of cities to gain easy access to spaces that they use often. This could be their workplace, it could be the commute and transport, or interacting with physical buildings using smart building technology. For example, if I want to understand how populated the building is, so that I can feel safe about going there, I can use a mobile app to kind of look up and see how many people might be in the building that day to kind of keep my contact with others at a minimum, especially during this time. I'm joined today by Stefan, Schwab, CEO of Enlighted, and Stan Boland, co-founder and CEO of 5AI. And I'm going to hand over to Stefan right now to do a little intro about what they've been up to.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Hi, everyone. So Enlighted, we are a building IoT platform, and we got acquired actually 2018 by Siemens. So we're here based in the Silicon Valley. And what we are up to, we are making buildings smarter, and we give, with our IoT end nodes, we give insights into buildings with data which has never been there before. And this is how we help then the user, the tenants of the building, the owner of the building, to really drive decisions based on insights in the building, based on data. And we've seen, unfortunately, through this pandemic, so I mean, this is one, I think, one benefit of this pandemic, I have to say, is that we get an encouraging discussion now again around how we can evolve smart buildings, but not only when you look at it isolated, because the overall topic when we talk about smart cities, buildings are a core of it, but there are other cores as well. And what we have to make sure is how can we connect buildings to all the other players in a smart city. And I think this is something, when you ask me, and the title is, how far away are we? I think this is one thing. Bridging this gap is a major topic we have to overcome through leadership.
Cool. Stan, do you want to do an intro and talk about what you've been up to at 5AI?
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah. So I guess up to this point, what we've been doing is we've built a team of roboticists, computer scientists, engineers, to machine learning specialists to kind of build a prototype self-driving capability. So basically applied to the problem of automated driving. I guess in the first phase of the company, we assembled a team to put such a system targeted on an urban environment. So we built like 8 cars, we built a full software stack. Yeah, anybody in the self-driving space knows there's a big difference between a kind of prototype system and an automotive grade, yes, safe, assured production system. So, you know, we've very much done the first of those in the first phase of the company. And what the company is now engaged on is building a platform of components that allows the development and assurance of a system that can actually go all the way across that chasm from prototype system to production system. So that's pretty much what the company is doing. We've got customers in both the traditional auto space, but also in the technology space as well, that are starting to use our platform to help them accelerate their program. And the main objective is to, I mean, essentially halve the time it takes to get from an initial working system to something that can actually, you know, be used to construct a safety case and launch a service. And those things are very, very different.
Cool. Thank you. So I'm going to dive straight in. I think I've lined up a few questions. I know that we're going to run out of time very quickly. So first question is going to be quite deep. Is what we're doing here going to be an individual success, or will collaboration and companies willing to share their ideas and ways of working, will that bring a better winner, having a collaborative approach on this? And do we think that governments or regions of the world can have a role to play in evolving these sorts of technologies, whether they be in the automation of vehicles or in putting technology into buildings and streets or whatever? Is collaboration going to win? And do governments have a role to play in this?
Yeah.
Go, Stefan, go. Yeah.
Sorry, Stefan, go.
Yeah, I also wanted to touch on Stan, because when we had the recap yesterday, I just realized also how far away, for example, what Stan is doing was a couple of years ago from smart buildings, but how this is now coming together. And now touching on what you're just asking, I definitely believe there needs, and I said it in my opening statement, there needs to be more leadership. And I think the leadership is not only siloed from a government, from industry. It has to be a joint leadership approach that we really put our heads together, use technology, which is already available, but again, try to have it in a collaborative approach. And you see then pockets where it's working. For example, I mean, live example, and we would be now in Berlin where there's a live example where I think, or where I know that Siemens together with the local government is trying to put together Siemensstadt, where we really talk about a smart district. And there you can see what can be done when government and industry, and this done openly, because also not that we do it again in an approach that we say, okay, when we can't do everything ourselves, we have to bring players from mobility. We have to bring other players to the table to really create this smart district. This is how I see it. And one real life example, and then I'm done. Here in our building, for example, when you have a smart building, multi-tenants, every company in this, or every tenant has a different system. And so you need someone overarching then to make this building at a whole, a smart building. You need someone who takes the leadership and tries to combine the individual systems, that you really have something which is state-of-the-art technology then, because otherwise it's just pockets.
Perfect. Stan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it depends really on what pathway people are taking to get to automated driving, in our case, the degree of collaboration. So I think there's three main pathways that you can identify. One path is the way the auto industry is headed, which is increasing the capability of individual features that go into vehicles that gradually add more driving assistance and eventually leads to a full self-driving system. That's very much the approach, say, Tesla's taking with their FSD system. Yeah, so that's kind of one approach with a high focus normally on verification and validation. But yeah, can be rather slow in feature development. The second approach is the approach that people like Waymo are taking, where they build a full, robo-taxi service that they aim to bring up in particular geographies, and they tend to be high on features, but actually need to backfill the safety assurance argument. So much of the stuff Waymo is doing right now is really focused on safety. So, and then the third area is looking at some very specific markets where an entire system could be deployed in a simpler environment, simpler operational design domain. And I think the degree of collaboration needed varies by individual route to market. So I think in the auto space, my view is that the auto industry would benefit greatly from having access to computer science platform development capabilities that allow them to scale simulation testing and very, very quickly find errors and weaknesses in their software to shorten development time. So yeah, but that's a sort of process of acceptance of that. In the big tech space, I think those guys tend to be quite weak on rigor and the V&V process, and they would definitely benefit from more external capability on that side. So I think both of the main approaches to autonomy definitely need more collaboration. Will we get it is down to the leadership of those companies, but it's certainly required, I think, if we're going to crack this problem.
And what do you think about the government statement? Do you think that governments could have a role to play in this?
Well, government's got a whole number of roles that it could play to cause a quicker adoption of automated technologies in cities. One, I think, is the ability to create a kind of focused kind of Project Apollo, if you like, that would attract sufficient capital and provide sufficient market that the results would need to flow from that. So you could, for instance, imagine taking a mid or a large size city and government saying, we are going to automate transport in the city, for example, by doing mass public transport, bus rapid transit routes, or trains into the city centre with automated motion around the city, both for people and for packages, for example. You can certainly imagine that being a Project Apollo, and with that Project Apollo, you would certainly grow companies and force collaboration to cause that to happen. So that is the sort of thing that governments could do. And then the second thing, obviously, is licensing and rights to operate the city. Government's got the right to license, and so if government said that we're not going to have 10 package delivery companies in a city, we're going to have one system and everybody has to share it. That would also be within government's power, would actually be good for the city, and would also create a concentration of effort behind one particular solution. So government does have a role to play in causing quicker adoption and innovation, I think.
Maybe let me quickly touch on that, because I fully agree with what you said. And when you think about public transport, in most of the cities around the world, public transport is owned and regulated by local governments. So in the end, when you ask, they have to play a role, because when we claim that public transport, for example, is a major part of a smart city, so there has to be an active role. And I always come with my idea or my vision about how can you look at the user and how can you make a really great experience for a user in the morning when he uses public transport, gets into an office, and a flexible office maybe in the future, doesn't matter actually where he sits anymore. But how can you connect that you can, with one interface, you can maybe purchase your public transport ticket, purchase your spot in the flexible workspace, and maybe even you can also, and we had the food discussion before, I was listening to that, maybe you also can already organize your grocery stores, but for that, this has to come together.
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely. Cool. I mean, so collaboration is going to be the key by the sounds of that. I've got a slightly lighter question for question number 2. Earlier on, I Googled 2 myths about your respective technologies, automated vehicles and also smart building technology. And the top results that come up in Google, one is that self-drive will not work in adverse weather conditions. And on the smart cities kind of like building technology side, a banker had $20 million stolen from them because they tried to call an elevator using their smart device. What are the best, or what's the best myth and best fact that either of you have heard about your respective technologies? Go to Stefan first.
Oh, I was hoping you go to Stan first. I mean, the best fact for me is that there is the technology to make, at least now from a building point of view, to make all the things we are trying to achieve possible is there. But again, it's in pockets and in silos. We have not bridged the gaps there. So then also the myth with the elevator is pretty interesting, because this is something, when you talk about a touchless building, especially now with this pandemic again, this is actually possible. When you have this journey, what I described before, that when you arrive in a building, the elevator knows in which floor you have to get off the elevator, or in which floor you're at the moment. If you really connect and get all the data insights, what is there already, and then have analytics on top of it, then you can make it happen. A real myth, that's a good one. I think sometimes a myth for me is that we believe having a smart city will solve everything. Will solve the topic of resiliency. Will solve the topic of we make it a very high quality of living in the city. I think the human aspect is very important to that, because there's a huge adaptation needed to these new technologies, and there's a lot of pushback as we tend to do things in our traditional way. And this openness and taking the humans on board and taking them on this journey, we sometimes underestimate when we are technologists. We believe another feature is just great, but we forget about how can we really make that a good experience for the user.
Cool. Yeah, and I think in the automated driving space, I mean, we have obviously been through, and probably in some ways still are in the middle of a Gartner hype cycle, which you will read about many times actually. So yeah, we have probably been in the peak of inflated expectations in 2017. We have probably gone through the trough of disillusionment in 2020, I hope, and we're into the slope of enlightenment in 21. And we'll reach the plateau of productivity in 23 and 24, probably. But I think in the peak of disillusionment, yeah, I think it's become common practice to say building a self-driving car, a self-driving system, automated driving system, is basically a $10 billion problem. And if you can't raise 10 billion, don't bother. And I think that really is flawed because it's entirely dependent on the constraint you can put around the operational design domain. So you mentioned before about adverse weather being a big challenge. I mean, that certainly is a challenge for self-driving cars. It's one of the many kind of environmental challenges that you might see. But I think it's also quite possible to imagine ways in which you can contain that operational design domain, and it is actually possible, I think, to get the specific use cases self-driving to market for significantly less than that, and significantly shorter space of time. So I think that's the biggest myth, is that don't bother unless you've got 10 billion. I think it could be over quite a lot less. It's not tens of millions, but it's probably high hundreds. I think the sort of biggest sort of fact, I think, is that people think that we can't possibly assure a self-driving system ahead of time. So how could you possibly be sure how this thing is going to behave? The state space is so big, the uncertainty of deep neural network outputs are just so immense, and so on. And I think what's evolved is a set of technologies from the semiconductor space, from the aerospace industry, and from computer science that come together, and I think do now allow you to create an arguments-based safety case with evidence that you can with certainty launch such a service. I think that those are the things I kind of point to.
Excellent. So I'm being hurried up already, and I feel like we've only just begun. So I was going to get on to, let's do a very quick. How can we encourage people back to the cities with this year being as it is, with the pandemic? How can we use our respective technologies to encourage people back to cities, or to use cities in a better way to make them feel safe and confident about doing that?
Yeah, well, one is a kind of sort of medium-term thing that will work, but the pandemic's had one effect, which is that the growth in e-commerce. We've had 10 years worth of growth in a few months. So if you look at like package delivery in a city, it's in Germany it's up 20% year on year. In the UK it's up 35% year on year. So these are massive changes, and take many business cases past the point of economic sense. And so I think it does provide this potential of a focus to get autonomy into cities for a particular purpose that can then be used to move people at the same time, or coordinate the moving of people and packages ultimately. So I think there are some routes in that we can now see that will cause modern cities to exist and to be fully functional.
Amazing. It looks like we're about to get kicked off. Stefan, go with something about touchless.
I make it very quick. So I believe the collaboration, leadership, government, industry is very important. I mentioned what's happening there in Berlin with Siemensstadt, but I also know something is happening, for example, in New York City, which is all over social media, where a real estate developer partners with the mayor of New York, and really using that pandemic now to reset what happened there and make it better in the future. So I think cities will play an important role in the future. It's about leadership. It's about taking the human aspect into consideration. And yes, I mean, touchless buildings, they are there. We just have to implement.
Yeah, Perfect. Okay, so I think we've talked quite a lot in quite a short space of time. I think the key points are we're not quite there yet. We need to break down some silos. There needs lots of adoption of this technology in order to get places. We need everyone to play a role. That was going to be my next thing about inspiring people, but we didn't get there. But everybody needs to play a role in this, in smart cities and future cities. And it needs some kind of leadership change and ways of working. I think we can call those points. And Nico, back to you.